Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is March 16, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Frederick Park. Hey, Frederick, where are you calling in from?
I'm in Yancey County, North Carolina, on the north side of Mount Mitchell, the highest peak east of the Mississippi, on the banks of the Tow River, cleanest river in eastern North America. So,
How cool is that, man? It's a great honor and a pleasure to be here with you. You're one of my heroes. We met through Swans Island Sweet Chariot Music Festival. And the first question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
the best thing for a human being is for somebody to teach them that they are first and foremost an animal.
Oh my God, I've never had that answer, and that is brilliant. We're going to go deeper into that. Frederick, what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Listening.
Oh my God, you're getting them out of the ballpark. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Why do I think they gather information?
Yeah, what? Yeah.
Because we are problem solvers.
And do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
Depends on the objective.
But I mean, Frederick, you would say humans, we might agree that humans innately want and need to eat.
Yeah.
But we didn't really invent, we invented how we eat. But you think this thing about gathering information, is it in us, in our DNA, or did we yeah,
You
go ahead.
know, in terms of your example, when one is hungry, if one is fortunate enough to have a mother at any level, whether it's tribal in a primitive place in the world or in a hospital, someone supplies a new human baby with milk.
Yeah.
So that's the opportunity to have an evolutionary concept of food comes from almost the moment we're born. So it is a different concept to apply that same dynamic to something that we have perhaps a different relationship with as we evolve and slowly learn how to use the body that we're encased in. So that which is intuitive, it's like you get hungry, you remember that there was milk until you're cut off from that supply, but then you've had the opportunity with your ears or your eyes or just your body, if you can't see or hear, to understand that there are other sources of things that one could alleviate this need for satisfying the empty stomach feeling.
Beautiful. And you get it. You put these questions into the context you want. And I'm glad we got into that for a second, because I give that eating thing as an example sometimes. And then I say, but there are breatharians and supposedly they don't eat, they just breathe. Now, do you believe that breatharians exist?
I've never heard that word.
Yeah, the
So
supposedly they don't eat, they just breathe. So, anyways,
I doubt that they exist for very long.
right.
They may very well exist, but they're on a short leash.
Frederick, do thoughts create emotions?
There's a symbiosis there. It's a circle.
Yeah.
The best example I can give you is children at the very elemental level of being really little babies. Once they can sit up, once they can crawl around, they understand compassion, but they do not know the word. They see another child their size in their immediate environment who is not happy. And unless they have been brutalized, their natural tendency is to alleviate whatever it is that's wrong by just going over and seeing, just being there, just being near, maybe touching them. So the Scandinavians have, in recent years, started celebrating the teaching of compassion as one of the standards, like the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. So the way they do it is with games. They let children come to understand their natural tendencies, and then only after they have exhibited these tendencies do they give it a name.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
You're getting what I'm after. Please appreciate it. Complete the sentence, fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I.
I don't know what I think until I ruminate on the input.
I like the word. What's another word for ruminate?
It's basically you have asked me a question, and I have explained that I think about thinking.
Ooh, metacognition. I love it. Can humans think without language?
Absolutely.
I love a certain. Chomsky says language is not just words, it's culture, it's tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work, when language breaks down?
the the issue of the breakdown of language is invariably one party or the other failing to listen
Yeah.
or excluding the option to listen.
You are one wise human. I'm learning a lot. I like it because you remind me of I interviewed George Carlin's daughter a couple months ago, and she would laugh at every question, then take a deep breath, then pause, and then answer. So I love people get this idea we're having fun. Your your observations of humans, I know it's both and it depends. Are humans more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Well, the option is to consider that there is a difference is partly because we have this thing called the big brain. It is what, at some point eons ago, differentiated us from other mammals. So, at what point in our evolution did someone choose to differentiate between the two? There is no differentiation until you impose language upon the concept.
Dude, you're pulling the curtain behind. You're like the atomic dog in The Wizard of Oz. You're pulling the curtain back. You're revealing all my secret questions. Well, you know what you really evoked there was at the end of their lives, Captain Beefheart and Frank Zappa were talking about a PBS special they saw on the Big Bang Theory. And Frank says, Don, what came before the Big Bang? And he goes, the big. So what came before the big brain? The big. Two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. First one, is thinking a function of the soul?
That is an interesting question because you have to consider again how I have learned the context of those words.
Yeah.
So anybody that would answer that would reveal to you something about how they learned or where they learned these words. The difference between Freud and Jung, predominantly, more than anything else, is the fact that Freud said it's the id, the ego, and the superego, end of story. And Carl Jung said there is something else that we cannot necessarily give a name to. Some would call it the soul. Some would call it the spirit of man. That thing that is what makes us human that we cannot find. You cannot dissect a human being and find the place where the spirit of being alive resides. But each person comes to those words with an entire library of life experience that would temper how they would simply approach the answer. In reality, no matter who they are or where they're coming from, they're talking about the same thing that Carl Jung was having a difficulty giving a name to.
I love it. That's beautiful. They asked Andy Warhol a question and he goes, can I just go Google, Google, Google? And they said, yes. So they asked him a question again. He went, Google, Google, Google. I like words. You're good with them. And I'm glad you're helping me in the language about language. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
Well, machines, again, can function along the lines of what some people choose to categorically use as the definition of thinking. But a machine cannot have a spirit.
Woo!
You cannot imbue a machine with a spirit.
Yeah, beautiful. Do you more pursue meaning or more pursue happiness?
What's the difference?
You're answering a question with a question. You win. That's what this is all about. Well, the difference, according, you know what? I got the question from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He says,
Yes.
happiness doesn't necessarily last, meaning can last. You know, that's a simplified way of saying it.
Well, let's take that one step further.
Yeah.
If meaningfulness can last, there is happiness in that thought.
Yeah. That is it. That is it. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it? Or are we actually creating consciousness?
Jerry, my answer to that is the distance between the ears is bigger than the universe.
Woo!
So consciousness, again, you have to come back to the choice of words that you have given me. What you are literally asking me to address is this unusual space of what can anyone know about oneself. I am able to think, I think. And so as I go along, I am, as so many have said before, aging and realizing how little I really know, that which may be known is vast. Now, I want to ask you to consider, while you're interviewing evidently a lot of people who are alive and well and referencing important literature, some of the important literature that deserves attention. And I have no doubt that it is not far below the surface for so many of us who have been isolated during the last 2 years because of the Dan panic. There's a mountain boy here who just loves to turn things around. He calls it the damn panic. So because of the damn panic, there are a lot of people who were never prepared to be isolated. There are a lot of people who were never prepared to confront themselves in the mirror. There are a lot of people who are very unhappy in their isolation. Therein is both a key and the concept that there is a locked door that needs a key. The locked door is isolation is a word. It's very similar to solitude. Solitude is comforting, is universally accessible as a place for massive quantities of integrity and learning between oneself and oneself. So, the opportunity to read the literature of solitude, not isolation, but solitude, will lead you in the greatest single body of work to the 2 or 3 centuries around the year 1 AD, when there were hundreds of people, literally, we'll never know, probably thousands and thousands of people all through the Mediterranean who had determined that they could exist in that harsh natural environment. And they chose that rather than be in the towns, in the cities where there was civilization. So the era of the hermit had a life. There was a moment in time on the history of the earth when many of these people actually wrote while they were in solitude. And there are many, many people since that time who similarly have chosen solitude as the deep well of invention. How do I find out where I'm going? I think I'll ask myself.
That is so it's funny, Frederick, because I like to say the Alan Watts line, not that I believe it or not, but he says, everybody's trying to find out who they are. If you figure out who you are, you're fucked. So this dialogue with yourself, it's like, anyways, that was really well put, and I appreciate that. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Light is a constant.
That's right.
People are not.
Beautiful. Audre Lorde, the poet, said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded to her and says, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest? What tool do you gravitate towards?
The littlest one.
That's pretty good. What new toy do you suggest?
The knitting needle.
Oh, what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I worry with some degree of regularity if I have reached out to people who matter in my life to simply tell them that they matter.
Oh, man. Did you get that the way your parents raised you or on your own?
I got that on my own.
Wow. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. And when I say artists, I mean writers, musicians. You know what I mean? It's a general term. Artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we might be able to learn to cope with what we don't like about them. So this is a made question McLuhan probed, and I ask you, why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Why do we ignore
Yeah.
that which artists are telling us?
Yep, that could you could reword it that way. Yeah.
So,
Well, it's a little deeper. It's not like the blatant, like what is Andy Warhol telling us with his soup can? You know, if you study him, it's like that's comfort food. That's what my mom, the next person might would go, well, that's taking advertising and making us see it as art. Or it's just, that's just stupid. I see that at the grocery store. So it's like, what's the hidden psychic effect that Andy's revealing to us? That's up to the user, but maybe humans ignore, they just take it as, oh, that's art and I'm looking at it. They ignore the deeper meaning, maybe, or the deeper
the
layer.
word you're looking for is truth.
Yeah, that's good. Truth is good.
It's not just good. That's the answer to the question. Everybody would like to know the truth. Those who have accepted some level of truth, if they got it from somewhere other than an artist, it is questionable. Artists' stake in the game is truth itself.
Wow. Okay, then how would you respond to Louis Buñuel saying, I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it?
Well, let's go back to artists.
Yeah.
No artist has actually, well, not very many, have actually claimed by presenting their work that they have found the truth.
Right.
Simply say, here is a truth that I recognize. I'm holding it up for you. If it resonates with you, then perhaps I have done something of value.
Yeah.
So, you know, let's just hover around art for a second. There was about 20 years ago a lovely interview on public radio back in the early days of NPR before they had sold out and and been abandoned by lots of federal money to keep them going, and now depend on corporate giving to succeed, which is of course influencing their subject matter, their storyline. So back in those days, they always did little interesting stories. If you were a reporter for NPR and you came up with an interesting line of inquiry, the producers would probably give you free rein to investigate that line of inquiry because they trusted their reporters. So a gallery show happened in Manhattan, and a young man had chosen to buy a great big huge load of railroad ties, and he'd thrown some off the Brooklyn Bridge and left them tied to a rope and soak in the water for a week or two. He tied one behind his car and drove it up and down the length of Manhattan. He took some of them and bolted them together and stretched canvas over them and just left them out in the weather. And then he put them in a gallery show because he had connections. And his first ever gallery show was seen by quite a few people out in Long Island who had deep pockets. And he had just, as a quirk, put fabulous price tag on everything. This was almost his first show. So there was no other body of work to which you could compare.
Gotcha.
So he was making a statement, which is what art does. Universally, whether it's good or bad, whether it's informed, whether it's tied to the truth or not, art makes a statement.
Yeah.
When the statement is put before the public either resonates to it in an affirmative way or not. Sometimes it gets a negative reaction. But if it sits around in a library or in a recording, in a book, as a painting or a sculpture, over the course of time, other people might discover that work and say there is something honest about this. And so while the interviewer was inquiring about this artist, he had chosen to bring together 3 or 4 of the most important curators alive in the world at the time, from the Guggenheim, the National Gallery of Art, several galleries up and down the East Coast. And they all commented on this artist's work. And the man from the National Gallery, when they asked him his opinion, he said, this work, this body of artwork, something sold for a lot of money. And in order to keep up with the people in the next yard, other people with deep pockets bought the next piece. He sold out his show and laughed all the way to the bank because, as a whim, he had put thousands and thousands of dollars on these various works. and they all sold. The man from the National Gallery said, "This will go down in the annals of art history as a sentence or two, if it ever makes it in the books." It's all about culture, art, relating to the buying of art. They are very different.
Yeah.
Are very, very different.
Well,
One
dude,
is
yeah.
the creation of art and putting a statement forward. The other is somebody putting a dollar value on it and consequently commercializing the art.
Yeah.
Art was not intended as a commercial enterprise exclusively. If
Yeah.
that's the reason to make art, that's the wrong reason to be making art. So
Yeah.
the man from the National Gallery basically said, in 50 or 100 years, nothing is being said by that artist in the creation of this work. So he created a statement that starts with a subject and has no verb and no direct object.
Yeah. Well, it evokes so much. And Duchamp said, the artists of the future will only have to point, but he's his clones like Warhol, who caught McLuhan's line, art is anything you can get away with. But I think what you're saying is the Balinese, McLuhan loved this line. The Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can.
Well, that brings into question the whole. I have to come back to my very first comment to you. Your very first question. Do you have it written down?
Yeah, it's what is the best thing for a human being? And you said somebody to teach them that they are just an animal.
Aha.
I think that was it. Yeah.
About what I said.
Yeah.
So, what is it that differentiates us from a squirrel or a bear or a mountain lion or any other mammal? And the answer is our big brain created language.
Yeah.
So, I give you this. In our in our in our pattern of seeking truth, in our pattern of seeking understanding, if the Balinese are after doing something as well as they possibly can, who does that sound like? Culturally speaking, any anthropologist will tell you this is the nature of most primitive cultures. That is a universal in primitive society. So, what is it that we've lost as we tune in to the big brain and all of the libraries of information that influence us? I would suggest that it is slowly the building up of scar tissue that is preventing us from understanding our most essential selves as animals. You can communicate with a dog in a car, in a parking lot, in a grocery store, who's locked in the car next to you. And just because you park your car and you open the door, and that dog starts barking and raising Cain like it wants to kill you, you can stand right there and not even look. And you can't use words because the dog really doesn't know words.
You tell it.
And we don't understand how to bark in the right way.
You are on my beam, brother. That is so
So
what I,
you stand right there and you try to imagine as you would do if you could, what is it like, dog in car, to be trapped in a car and have someone get out in a car next to you that makes you so anxious? I cannot open this car and let you out, but I recognize that you are there, and I recognize that you exist, and I honor your life. And you can't say it in words, but that's all we have. So that's the starting place. And if you practice this with any animal, including the squirrels in the trees, or a fox on the side of the road, or an animal in the zoo, it is possible to slowly learn that there is an exchange. Something is coming back, and it's not words. And it is something that all of us own the right to know about and have lost it because the big brain and the creation of language is like scar tissue keeping us from knowing who we are as animals.
Beautiful. Do artists have a moral obligation?
To themselves,
Yeah.
absolutely they do. But that again comes back to words.
Yep.
What artist, if you ask them to explain to you, where do you get your morals from, or explain to me something about your morals, they're immediately going to start filtering the library of information that is their worldly experience, the books and the movies and the people and the so on, and the input that's all tied to language.
Yeah.
But if you ask the kids on the playground or the little babies playing in a crib together, or if you just watch them, they are moral beings.
Yes.
And they unlearn it depending on what family they're in.
Boy, you said one of my favorite words, unlearning. What was the motive of the cave artist? Your hunch, not so much what anthropologists or Herzog or whoever reports on it. Your intuition, what was the motive of the cave artist?
Are you a student of cave art?
Not per se. I like Herzog film is good on it, and then the article he based it on in the New Yorker was really good.
All right.
But
Let me,
I'm not a deep I am not a deep I'm a student of it because for the last 40 years I've asked people this question. So it's
okay.
interesting. Yeah, I can give you what 80% of the people say.
Oh, I don't
That's all.
want that. I want to tell you, you have waded into something that is not only very interesting to me, but something that I have been examining for 40 years.
Wow.
So let me just take you on a little scenario. Light pollution is a real thing. Where I live, there is no light pollution. I am in a designated dark zone. So in the nighttime, when the sun goes down, if there is no full moon like there's about to be on Friday at 2:13 a.m. in the morning, where I live in the Eastern Standard Time Zone, If there are clouds thick enough, I'll still have just a hint of the moon. But in 2 weeks, when there is no moon, you cannot see your hand in front of your face if you go outside of the house with the lights off. I mean, it's black. Now, when you go into the absolute blackness, you are tying yourself into the reality of what it was like for any human being in the history of the world to experience night. Now, what is that? The ramifications of wandering into the absolute darkness is scary. You have no idea what your next step is if you're not in familiar terrain. You could be stepping off a cliff or in a hole. What was it like to actually see face to face a bear or a saber-toothed tiger or any big wild animal that was, or even a little one? Oh my gosh. There are badgers are some of the most ferocious animals on the planet. They will back down something 10 times their size. And it's again, it's just beyond language. The big animal looks in the eyes of the little animal and goes, "Not today. I get it. I'm leaving." Something is going on between these two that has nothing to do with language as we know it. But the Carl Jungian concept of the spirit of life happens to carry itself into the darkness. Now, Lascaux is probably the most famous. It's the one that most people could call up. It's in southern France, in the Pyrenees. The paintings are so delicate on the walls that they no longer allow tourists in there except by very special permission. But about 30 years ago, deep sea divers discovered a cave off the coast of Italy, and 30 plus feet underwater was an entrance to a cave underwater. And they followed the cave underwater for a long way. And it finally came up into a cavern big enough to stand up in that had air in it. So they had gone underwater and up above the sea level in a cave. Then they went back and they went back and they found another cave. Now, Jerry, you know, of course, that when we look at any sample of an antique human skeleton, that people have been growing in physical stature over centuries. So humans, during the period of cave art, which we'll just call long ago and far away, people were smaller. So imagine, I've been around you. You're about as tall as me. We're about the same size.
Yep.
But they found a cave that they needed to put somebody very small into. And this person travels a meandering up and down and back and forth cave that comes into this huge cavern where there is the most recent discovery of prehistoric art in modern times. And only after they had accessed that cave, made a document with photography of what was on the walls, years later, did they realize by someone climbing through that cave on their back that the entire length of a football field, 100 yards long, there was a continuous mural painted on the ceiling in a crawl space that you and I physically couldn't even get into. Now, try to picture a little bowl with oil in it and a wick with a little piece of flame and hanging out on your back with some kind of a brush painting inches away from your face, wild animals in a hunt that travels for 100 yards. You are entering, if there is such a place, and again, I'm going to come back to words here for a second that are powerful because they are specifically capable of drawing us into a religious context. The Holy of Holies is borrowed by Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. What is that? That is the most sacred place. Sacred alludes to the concept of aphysical, of spiritual. What was it like in an environment where it's you versus nature in the daylight? Because when the sun goes down, you must be in a protected place. Because until the sun comes back up, you will be, if you aren't in a protected place, you are in an environment that is constantly filled with fear of being attacked by anything that can get around at night. And if you lived back then, you were no doubt aware that there were a lot of other beings, wild animals, that could get around at night. We didn't even understand what eyes were. We didn't know that some animals have night vision. That was all yet to be discovered. So animals that could cruise around at night had to be seen as exceptional to a fault. So when you go into cave art, you are entering the realm of humans putting objects on walls in a place that is protected, and they are making pictures of that which matters. So a place like that was a holy of holies. You went there to be awestruck in safety.
Beautiful. In safety. Frederick, so well put. I really appreciate it. So poetic hearing you speak. And can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
My earliest memory ever. Well, me and my twin brother were sitting in the womb, and we just couldn't get over who was going to go first. And eventually, when I started growing this beard, we finally were born. And by that time, just listening through the outer skin of our mama, we'd both learned how to talk, and they credit me and my twin brother with being the people who introduced Southern hospitality in the world, because the only thing that we knew how to say was, you first. No, please, you first. No, you first.
That's called womb service. Very good. Is is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Memory?
Yeah.
Oh, goodness gracious. Well, let's go back. Let's go back to Bali. In the United States, I bet there are a lot of people who would say that memory is a curse. But if the people in Bali actually do lead a life where they're trying to do their best work, there's no way it's a curse.
Yeah.
So memory is determined right this minute. What are you doing? You're talking to me, and I'm talking to you. And this is going to be sweet in a week or a month to remember getting to visit with Jerry, who I've not seen in a bunch of years. So there's no way that this would ever be a curse.
I
But
agree.
I'm not, I'm a fan of comparative religion, but I do not wear anybody's banner on my sleeve. And Thich Nhat Hanh would say, let's do the dishes to be doing the dishes.
Yes.
Thich Nhat Hanh would say, let's live our life right this minute, simply being present. And if somebody could pull that off, there probably would be no reason for your question. Everybody's memories would be good.
I agree. And you nailed Wyndham Lewis, The Hidden Ground of Joyce M. McLuhan. He said, artists live in the present, be here now. Artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future.
Uh,
So tell me someone within your immediate family, and then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, who was like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Georgia Rose is my oldest daughter. She's 42. When she graduated from college, she was the first year of undergraduate students to graduate from what had previously been exclusively a graduate school. And that particular school was noted as a school that engaged any student in any discipline with one specific charge. Whatever it is you're studying, there is an Eastern and a Western perspective on your subject matter. And it is appropriate, if you are at this school, that you should examine and compare and contrast the Orient and the Occident. So, given that the faculty reflected that diversity, in other words, the faculty really came from all over the world, they always got in a big argument about who was going to be the person to give the commencement speech at the end of the year. So after 4 years of their first series of undergraduate students, somebody floated my daughter's name. And for the first time in the history of the school, in the first series of votes, they unanimously selected her to be the commencement speaker at her own graduation.
Oh my God.
And on the night before she spoke, I found her out in the woods near a little party at a friend's house where many of the graduates were there with their families. And I said, "What were you doing out in the woods?" She said, "Oh, I just had a little ritual." She knew that originally when she was approached, she did not want the job of being the commencement speaker in front of so many people who she admired. She did not feel up to the task. But when she was finally convinced that she should do it and she accepted, she wrote and rewrote and wrote and rewrote a very engaging speech. And the night before she delivered it, she went out in the woods and built a little fire and sat there by the fire and read the speech and then burned it because she knew that she already had in her mind what she wanted to say. And so she was invited to the podium the next day to give her commencement speech. And she put her two hands on either side of the podium and she looked every single person in the eye while she spoke for about a half an hour. And when it was over, there wasn't a dry eye in the house, and the whole crowd of faculty, students, parents gave her a standing ovation. And this is the essence of what she said. Among other things, I have been a student of the psychology of education for 4 years. And I understand that there are ways of learning that are formal and that there are ways of learning that are informal. And they both have pluses and minuses. And as she goes over the pros and the cons of both sides of that equation, she came down to a little distillation of her larger perspectives. And she said, it's impossible for us to ignore that formalized education is a hierarchy. As humans, we celebrate this amazing thing that is our intellect. And second in line, this other irrefutable fact of our physical being and our physical development is second to intellect. It is not an equal footing. It is not higher. It is second. And third, and almost unmentionable, is this thing that we might call the spirit of humans. So, not wanting to tread on diverse student body from diverse backgrounds, not wanting to speak about spirituality in a specific way that would offend some and compliment others and be an oblong blur to some. It is undeniable that it is part of who we are. And so, in the real world learning of someone who does not have access to the formalized, systematized pursuit of education, all of these elements play together in varying degrees. And there is not a hierarchy that's consistent. There's a hierarchy of what seems to be the most important at any given moment in time. So, from these two perspectives, I would like to suggest that our goal ought to be to announce that humans have these trifectas in us. There is the intellect, there is the physical side of who we are, and there is something to be said about the spirit of being alive. And when there is a level playing field, we will have arrived. So that was a very easy question to answer.
It's so beautiful. Was that at Naropa? Beautiful. I would love to experience that, but your recreation was gorgeous. Tell me someone outside your immediate family, please, who had an impact on you. Same question, just briefly. What specifically was that impact?
John Berger.
Oh, yeah. What'd you get from John?
In the early 60s, I decided that I wanted to write a letter to John Kennedy. I was raised in a family of Democrats, and I had simply chosen on my own because there were books and magazines and journals, and visits to the library were very common in our family. And I had become a student, even though I was a really little kid. And I knew all the brothers and sisters' names. I knew all the cousins' names. I'd read all kinds of articles and books. I'd read about Joseph Kennedy, and I didn't know what I thought about him. But John Kennedy, I liked. And suddenly he got elected. He won his race against all odds. First Catholic president of the United States. So my dad, who was a big fan of language, he said, well, you can't send a letter without letting me look at it because this needs to be a good letter. You really want to be proud of what you're doing. So I showed it to him, and of course, he drew lines all over it, and I had to write it over. It finally, after about the fourth or fifth draft, I mailed it. And John Kennedy wrote me a letter back. And he sent me an 8x10 black and white portrait of he and his wife. I have no idea where it is now, but for the longest time, it was the most important thing I ever would own. But as I grew, the power that I took from that was, and it's difficult to do now, but whoever you thought you wanted to write a letter to in the 60s, if you knew their address, you could write a letter, pencil or ink on paper, and you put it in the mail, and they would probably write you back. Those days are gone. But I believed in that dynamic. And when I first read, the first book that I ever read of Berger's was Another Way of Seeing. So he also wrote about seeing. He also wrote a trilogy of novels and collections of poetry. He wrote screenplays. And I realized that he had become an expatriate, and he'd left France and he'd gone to live in, or he left England to go live in the south of France on the Swiss border. And I wrote him. And I wrote to him at his publishers because I did not have an address for him. And almost a year later, he finally got the letter and he wrote me back. And so we had this little exchange. John Berger changed my life because until that moment in time, I was a big fan of John Ruskin. Oh my God. Nobody would I recommend reading John Ruskin now. But little did I know that Berger was writing at that time. I could have been reading Berger when I first started reading Ruskin, but nobody told me about him. He was below the below the horizon.
Yeah.
He wasn't celebrated as he would eventually be. I think he's the most important art critic. And by the way, that is his primary role in my mind and heart. I love him as a poet, as a photographer, as a screenwriter, as a novelist, but his work in helping anyone understand a way to look at art. How do you look at art? His perspectives, I have read him again and again and again, and were he still alive, I would write more letters to him because my own thinking has evolved because of him.
Beautiful. So well put. And did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Yeah. We were raised Roman Catholic in Appalachia.
Do you pray?
Do I pray? Um, well, that's a word. So the dynamic, I am definitely in communion with the dynamic, but that is not adequate by itself. That word it draws upon a very narrow interpretation of what I would call that same dynamic.
Well put. And if God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Well, Jerry, when I die, whatever you say works for me.
No, you love this cartoonist last week. He was a Susie Williams male groupie. He said, God would say, we checked our records here. We made a mistake. We're returning you to Earth.
So there's this old man down in Louisiana, and he's just dyed in the wool Christian. And he's sitting there in his house, and it starts raining. And after a few days, he looks out, and dadgum, his whole yard is flooded, and he can't even get out. Well, another few days, and the rain is still going on, and now it's all the way up to the porch. And he says, goodness gracious, I'm going to have to move up to the second floor. And about that time, a boat pulls up in his yard, and some fellers that he's never seen offer him a ride to safety. He says, oh no. He says, I pray night and day, and I know that I've led a good life, and the Lord's going to take care of me. Well, the water rises. He's living on the second floor. Boat comes back. He's refusing to go with them for the same reason. A few days later, he's stuck on the roof, and the house is just barely sticking out of the water. He's right up, and the boat comes back, and he turns him down. He says, no, God's going to take care of me. Well, the water's rising, and the guy drowns. He gets up there to the pearly gates, and St. Peter turns on the light and opens the door and walks outside and yawning and stretching. And he says, name? The guy says his name. He goes through the book. He goes, oh, yeah, you're here. Come on in. He goes, wait. I'm not supposed to be dead. I've believed in the Lord, and I've led a good life, and you guys let me drown. He says, oh, wait. He goes back to the book. He says, we sent 3 boats.
That's reduced version is guy falls off the side of a mountain, which is what I learned yesterday. Kerouac's 100th birthday, he said, you can't fall off a mountain. And I says, yes, you can. In this joke, guy falls off the side of a mountain. He's holding on to a root, a tree root on the side of the mountain. And he yells, help, is there anyone who can help me? Clouds part, God's voice go, I'm God, I can help you. Let go of the root and I'll save you. Guy goes, is there anyone else who can help me? Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Well, this comes right straight back to the difference between being an infant and seeing what you get when you meet anybody face to face and they are in the world. It's like when Hitler was born, he was as innocent as you or me.
Yeah.
What made Hitler Hitler?
Yeah.
Who knows? But he became Hitler.
Yeah.
So the difference between being born and who you become is everybody's responsibility.
Everybody. Beautiful. Frederick, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? This one I'll set up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK says, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. It's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you react to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, the opportunity to acknowledge them is that sentence all by itself is weighted by your exact choice of words.
Yeah.
So if I acknowledge them, it might simply mean that I'm standing on the street and I turn and I look and I see them standing right there. Well, if they see them, and nothing about me changes, I haven't necessarily acknowledged them, but they might think so. Or if I spoke, if I assumed an attitude. So the opportunity to have an enemy is something that we make happen. How many times have you seen a film or a play? What comes to mind is Javert on the quay across from Notre Dame in Les Miserables.
Yeah.
When he's about to kill himself. And he says, you hate me, don't you? This is at the very end of the book. He says, I don't hate you. I don't think about you. And Javert can't stand that thought. No. Now, if anybody deserved to hate another person, there would have been an opportunity for one human being to hate another, because his entire life, Javert had been a thorn in that man's side. He had ruined his life on multiple occasions. And when he asked him directly, you hate me, don't you? He said, I don't think about you. I don't hate you. I give you this. Everybody could take apart Les Miserables if they read it once every 5 years, would be a different book every time you read it. The same way, this is crazy, I would have said that about Moby Dick if it weren't written as an 18th century book. But the language of the 18th century, you have to just wade through it till the music of it gets in your body. and you get used to the fact that Melville was trying to use the rhythm of another moment in time to be abstract. But for us here in the 21st century, it makes it a little less accessible than reading a good translation of Les Miserables. So Victor Hugo, he hit one nail on the head after another in that story. And it's got life lessons just oozing out of it. So
Wow.
the answer to your question about hatred is uh, there are unfortunate circumstances in my life that cause me to have feelings that disgust me about other human beings. And I have tried to simply walk away from those feelings and say, I choose not to think this way. So,
Yeah. Really well put, Frederick. You anticipated this next question. You must have ESP. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Faulkner, years later, said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?"
well, that's a question for people who are entertained by words in the 20th and the 21st century. There was a moment in time, as you probably well know, when people almost universally did not travel more than 5 miles away from where they were born. Tourism, when it became an idea, was only a few hundred years ago. People would come to the little town where you lived in the mountains, and they would tell you what it was like to see the ocean. And you just couldn't get your head around it. But when people finally got the courage, it was a hard thing to do to leave your town, because as soon as you got beyond that 5 miles, it's pretty likely that you weren't in a caravan. You might be by yourself, and you were entering the unknown, just like going into the night. It was scary to go beyond your kin, but to hear about it, we are rabidly hungry for information about life, period. Life in the house next door, life down the road. What? There's another town over there? What's that like? So, to feed the imagination doesn't take much for a little bit of fuel to start a big fire.
Hey, let me just ask you, Frederick. We got a few options. I asked for 90 minutes. I've gotten through about 12 out of potential. Usually I do 40 or 50. Can you go longer now? Do you want to do a part two, another setting? What's your what's your thought? What's your thoughts?
uh, how long we've been going?
Well, we've been going 60 plus 20, 80 minutes. So I asked for 90. We can go another 10 and go for part two, or just call it in 10 minutes, or go another 10, 20, 30, 40, whatever you name. But it
Well,
just give me an idea how you feel.
let's do let's shoot. In order to keep you within the same time frame of what you do as a pattern, let's shoot for 90 and we can plan part 2 another time.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay. Um, tell me, you've been, if I'm at a cocktail party and I meet you, I say, "What do you do, Fred?" And so, you would tell me whatever. But I know you as a storyteller, musician, songwriter, and you might describe that better. What I would like you to tell me is, in that regard, your career, your calling, when was the tipping point in your life? Did you're a musician, were your parents raising you with live music around the house and you naturally became that, or you're listening to music on the radio and I want to do that? Sort of walk us through that that tipping point when you chose to be a songwriter, musician, whatever.
Well, I was invited, I guess it was back in the 70s, to go to work for a little company in Chicago, Illinois called the School Assembly Service. And they were offering to pay me, if I put together a small band, no more than 4 people, they were offering to pay me $100 a person a day, all of our travel expenses, all of our food expenses, and I signed a contract for a year. And what that did is that gave me a resume of some, I don't know, 1,500 schools that I worked in Minnesota and Wisconsin and upper and lower Michigan and Illinois, Indiana, a little bit in Ohio, a little bit in Missouri, a little bit in Iowa, a little bit in Kentucky, but mostly back and forth and up and down across Illinois and Wisconsin and Minnesota and Michigan. The outcome of that was that once I started diversifying and doing other kinds of art, I always had this fallback gig. I could reach out to a public school and I could show them my resume. I'd get a gig like that. So if I was going to be in your town for 2 or 3 days and I had a day off that was a weekday, in advance, I'd reach out to whatever school looked like it had some kind of a program going on, send them letters, send them my resume, and so on. And I always got the job. So I have a lot of opinions about education because I've been in thousands of schools in 37 of the 50 states, and including Alaska, where I served for an entire year as an artist in the schools. But at one point in time, I was at a local school here in North Carolina, and they had invited me to be teaching writing in the classes of literature, to be speaking about reading as a skill, as a life skill. I was doing theater in physical education and traditional dance. I was teaching printmaking and drawing to the art students. I was teaching singing to the choir students. This little kid, he was probably 3rd or 4th grade. After day 1, he said, "You've been in every one of my classes today." He says, "What do you really do? You're a mechanic, right? Or you got a little shop somewhere. What do you do? How come, what do you really do?" And I looked at him and I said, "I take that question very seriously." I said, "I'm going to be here all week. Let me think about it and I'll get back to you." And he could tell. I mean, I got down on his level. I'm looking him in the face. And I said, I'll let you know. Nobody ever really asked me that. And I thought about it. And the next day, I went over and found him at lunchtime. And I sat down next to him. I said, you see those people over there at that table? I said, I don't know them. I haven't met them personally yet, but look at that little girl right there with a little plaid dress on. There's something about her face. She looks really interesting. And she's got a circle of friends around her. I don't know them, but just looking at that table, that little group at the end of the table really interests me. Now, look over here. Those kids at that table are a different age group. But look at those boys and girls sitting together. They're like laughing. That's a happy bunch over there. What would it be like to get the faculty and the principal to agree to let me take those 4 girls and those 6 kids over there that are a little older and just spend a couple of hours in a classroom and talk about what could we do together if we were going to create something? Has anybody got any ideas? I have a sense, a sixth sense about bringing together this group of people with this group of people. And that is what I do. I build community. I facilitate communication with people as the paint while I'm making a painting called Life Itself.
Wow.
So my visual art, theater, storytelling, music, dance, I have my hands in all these different arenas. But that is what I do, Jerry.
That is well done. Frederick, you're my inspiration. I love to do that myself. That's what I do across the board.
When that kid asked me, that's been, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. When that kid asked me, I thought about it. I thought, I should have been asking myself this question some time ago. It would have made my life a little easier.
Well, a screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process?
Oh, plays a great deal. But let me take this concept of great art, because you couched both comments in terms of great art.
That's right.
The job is art. Great art? Who knows?
Yeah.
I have to come back to that little interview from NPR that I mentioned about the guy in Manhattan who was making artwork out of railroad ties with canvas on them.
Yeah.
His last comment was about great art. And he said, when you put your art out there, the artist is working very privately, even if they're a playwright, and they're eventually going to collaborate with a director, or maybe they are the director and they put on their own play. And these people who've come to participate as actors and the technical people in the background, you never know what you got until the audience comes. So you create art, hopefully resonating to that earlier concept that we've already spoken about a couple of times, which is what is true?
Yeah.
What is honest? What is the truth as I understand it about life? If there is anybody that I hate on a metaphorical level, is I hate people that are arrogant.
Yeah.
There is no room for arrogance. And the only thing you need to do to prove it to yourself is reread the Oedipus story.
Yeah.
Arrogance is blindness. Who would choose that? So the artist makes art and puts it out there. Maybe the public resonates to the appreciation that this artist has spoken truth on some level that I can grasp. When that art is grasped across linguistic divisions and age groups and time itself, when the decades have passed and people are still resonating to it, that is great art.
Amazing.
Time must pass.
Yeah.
Time must pass.
You again anticipated the next question. Marcel Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much do you think of your audience when you're creating your art?
Oh my God, Jerry. Marcel Duchamp says there is no art without an audience. Jerry, you have complimented me by inviting me here to ask questions. You know that I'm a storyteller. The greatest single revelation in the time of the damn panic for me personally is appreciating that not only we are stuck with words, we love words. They are who we are as the big brain people, the big brain mammal. Stories help us determine by just saying it without even consciously thinking about it. If you ask me about a recent separation from a sweetheart or somebody who just died and whatever, if I'm pulled out by you asking me a question and I start to deliver to you something of meaning to me, I am, by sympathetic magic and the formation of words, I am hearing my own thoughts reveal themselves to you. And I am consequently helping orient myself to my place in my universe. So, as a storyteller, what's more important? Me being able to say these things out loud, or you, dear friend, patiently listening? And I would suggest that an audience or a careful listener is worth 10 times more than a good storyteller.
Woohoo! Well, perfect, Frederick, because this is Ruth Draper, one of the first, or, in a monument in one woman performance storytelling. She said the key is to bring the audience up onto the stage and into the scene with you. It is they who must give you even more than you give them in the way of imagination and creative power. How do you do that?
Well, I have to pick her apart. And I'll tell you, we can't go backwards in time. I live in Appalachia. Anybody who's a serious student of stories is at least familiar with some of the old storybooks that have been sitting in libraries across the country for our entire lifetimes. Um, there's a guy named Richard Chase. He wrote a book called The Jack Tales. He wrote another book called The Grandfather Tales. I used to be Dick Chase's driver. So when he was too old to see very well, he didn't want people to know that he couldn't see. And I just happened through my family to know this guy, and um, I took him around. But even before Dick Chase, I had gotten to know people who had an inherited body of stories. So the phenomenal interest in storytelling that's going on right now and has been for growing for the last 20, 25 years. In context, it's tied to the oldest art form that humans know, the cave art, to be present in the cave. If there were two people there, they would be talking about their life relative to that art. They would absolutely be telling their story.
Yeah.
And if their grandfather or great grandfather had been alive, they would be telling this other person the stories from the ancestors. Well, the great stories got handed down. And every anthropologist will tell you that the greatest percentage of people who collectively honor and practice memory are people who do not have a written language.
Wow.
So, songlines, Bruce Chatwin's book about Australia and the Aborigines who can cross anywhere they want to go on the continent of Australia, and they sing. And the songs that they sing are very unusual because the song is about landscape. And they sing the landscape into being. If they're going south and they turn west, the song changes relative to that place.
Yeah.
So if they had turned to the east or the west 5 or 10 miles before that, it would be a different song. So the book is called Songlines. In the Second World War, the Dalai Lama at the time said to all of the monks in Tibet, you must each take enough books privately into your chambers so that there are no books left in the library. And then your job with this coming war is to remember the entirety of the books that you have in your possession. And in so doing, if we have to flee this place, you are the books that you have remembered. And we will eventually come back together and rewrite them. So, human memory is a phenomenal thing. But if I have learned a story from an old timer here in the mountains who never saw vaudeville, who hardly ever went to the movies, but had learned a story from his mother, who learned it from her mother, who learned it from her mother, and so on, then when I'm sitting there, something that's coming towards me out of the mists of time that is very difficult for me to explain, but the person who's talking to me, I can physically see them remembering who told it to them. And consequently, they have tapped into the person remembering who they have tapped into an ancient chain. And it's most likely going to be across the kitchen table or from one armchair to another. So the essence of how you use your voice, if you're sitting right here next to me, and I'm talking really slow and really steady, and I'm telling you a little kid jumped tail, and all of a sudden I go, boo. If you're sitting right next to me, you'd jump. But if there's 10,000 people in the audience and I do that in front of a microphone, everybody will understand that I had intended for them to all jump. But if I do it loud enough that they all jump, the people in front of the speakers are going to be deaf for the rest of their lives. So storytelling exists in two worlds. There is the storytelling that is what I like to think of as the storytelling of the clock. And then there is the storytelling that does not know the clock. So the storytelling of the clock is the storytelling of the medieval players on a little wagon rolling into town. And how long can we hold their attention? So our little show is elastic. It's either going to be 10 minutes or it might be an hour and 10 minutes. If we get an audience, then our story will be expansive. And over time, it moves into a theater. Vaudeville was how long is your act? You can't do more than 15 minutes max, and you'd better be good for the entire 15 minutes. Because if you have a lull, we're going to give you the hook. And so it goes until TV comes along. And you watch Red Skelton, who told anecdotes and stories. His punchline was based on a story that he might have heard as a little one-liner, and he put clothes on the skeleton and padded it until you could really smell who he's talking about. And nowadays, if you turn on the internet and you go to the little moment in time where you're looking a stand-up comic, it's one joke to the next in sound bites. Have you heard of TikTok?
Yes.
TikTok is the social media of young people. Young people are not on Facebook. TikTok's website says if you can't get your audience in 7 seconds, don't even think about uploading a video. Your average video on TikTok is only 30 seconds long, and their maximum amount of time is only 3 minutes. So, what if I wanted to reach out across the boundaries of space and time and engage somebody who's a teenager or a preteen, and they have been programmed for the 7 seconds or the 30 seconds? But I want to talk to them about something to do with history that seems to be in the mists of time way long ago, but the ramifications of what happened long ago are being manifest right now. To explain the relationship in 7 seconds is not possible. In 30 seconds, it's not possible. In 3 minutes, I can barely hint at what's possible. So, all cultures have seen people that are getting older as their greatest resource. You are the library. I am the library because of our age. If we look at humans in any moment in time, except now, there is a distance between group A and group B. The worse disease on the planet, worse than the pandemic, is divisiveness. It's everywhere and it's growing, and nobody is calling it out with any consistency. But in actuality, one of the consequences that brought us to this divisiveness between the age groups of older people and young people is time itself and how we have oriented ourselves towards, I want a whole lot for very little.
Yeah.
Give me everything in 3 seconds. Give me everything in 30 seconds. If I don't laugh right now, you're not worth my time. If I'm not entertained right now, you're not worth my time. So,
Yeah, well, Frederick, we try to nurture commonality. And the Australian Songlines book was brilliant because it recalled to me Carl Andre, the sculptor, who said sculpture as place. So I love this whole thing about the song changes as they're walking. But in the regards to storytelling, Hals Frampton, the great experimental filmmaker, said, narrative is born among the animal necessity of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Can you forget to die?
have you read much about Egyptian culture?
I I have not, but please enlighten me.
Well, it seems to me in the whole world that it is the only culture for uh, hundreds of years that embraced the concept that the most important life is right on the other side of the doorway called death. And everything that we're doing right now is getting ready to begin life. So I dare you, or any of your listeners, to create 3x5 cards, put it on your refrigerator, put it in your bathroom, on the mirror, put it in your car, put it in your pocket, carry it around hanging off the front of your hat right down in front of you. It says, contemplate your own death today. See if you can do it all day long for one day, just one day. And I guarantee you, the culture that we live in today, that is an impossibility. It would take a very rare, absolutely devoted individual to sit back and contemplate one's death. But if you were to ask me about important stories in my life, I would tell you a story of death and dying. I love stories about death and dying. So check this out. Here's a comic from almost anywhere across the last 60 years and says, the three things that you just don't talk about in polite society are drugs, sex, are sex, religion, and politics. You've heard that. And then they proceed to either tell you a story about one or all three. Well, by its absence from that list, more noticeable as the one thing that we don't talk about is death itself. And if we did, we would all be entertaining a very unique and profitable appreciation of the philosophical subgenre called ontological pursuit. So, ontology is a consideration of end time and how do we appreciate life now at this moment relative to end time. What are your concepts? Are you an existentialist and it's over and it's over? You just boom, you drop dead and that's it? Or are you, every belief has got its own pattern of what's going to happen after you die. It's like, why not think about what happens now if you think about how you would like your death to be? I give you this, Jerry. Lying on your deathbed, irregardless of pain, that side of ourselves we're referring to as indescribable, the spiritual side, it's going to be able to, you're going to be able to state to yourself, I'm either dying happy or I'm not.
Yeah.
I would suggest that everybody wants to die happy, even if they're in pain. If they know they're dying happy, the pain is bearable. J.P. Morgan, richest man in the world, I have no doubt in my mind that he was miserable on his deathbed, knowing all the pain that he had inflicted and how many people hated him and what vile stories would be told about him after he was gone.
Yeah, it sounds like Sam Goldwyn. As for the critics, don't even ignore them. but life after death. Paul Krasner says, I only believe in life after death in one of my past lives. but I do like Bob Dobbs' line. What happens to you after you die is whatever you believe happens to you after you die. So who knows? I mean, Frederick, let's do a part 2 if you're willing, but I mean, we could keep going with a few key questions, or I could close it off with this one doozy.
Go ahead. We'll do one more and then we'll stop.
Okay. Thornton Wilder, 1928, Our Town playwright. Art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for almost 2 hours. I really appreciate it. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you? Great laugh, by the way, dude.
Okay. It's all about one story. So, I could give you a serious answer or I could give you a humorous answer. You pick.
Both. No, humor, but if you can do both, great. If I have to choose, humor.
Okay. I'm going to tell you Joseph Campbell's favorite joke.
Oh, wow. Love it.
He told this to me sitting across the dining room table at George Armstrong's house. So there's a young man, when he's born, is just adored in his little community because he happens to be just good at everything and a good kid. He's sweet. He's prescient. But he has this side of him, such a hunger, a burning desire to answer the deeper questions of life. And what it evolves into is literally looking for the meaning of life. And so it goes that he winds up leading the life of an ascetic. And he's been a hermit from time to time, but he keeps going and looking for the wise women and the wise men from one culture to the next. And he traverses vast geographic reaches of the planet that we live on. And finally he's told of a very, very wise man in the high Himalayas. And he's able to engage some Sherpas who lead him up on his trek to visit the old man's cave, because he evidently just doesn't ever come down off the mountain anymore. And on his journey, a snowstorm and an avalanche takes out his entire company, and he's buried alive. And he wakes up sometime later, realizing that he's unable to speak or hardly move, and he's in a cave. And there's somebody there, and then his eyes over a day or two finally adjust, and he's looking around and he's realizing that the old man that he was seeking had found him and had saved him, and that the rest of his company had all died in the avalanche. And as the old man nurses him back to health, he realizes that they have one or two languages in common. And so after he's back to himself and he explains his lifelong quest, he says, "Could you talk to me about the meaning of life?" And the old man, he says to him, "My son, life is like a candle." He says, wait. He says, "I've been all over the world." He says, "I've spoken with the Pope. I've spoken with the Dalai Lama. I've spoken with wise people and shaman up one continent and down another. I've been referred to vast libraries. I've spent time in private meditation. And I ask you, this man who has been referred to me by so many different people, who saved my life, I ask you about the meaning of life, and you say life is like a candle?" And the old man looks at him. He says, "You mean it's not?" And that is Joseph Campbell's favorite joke.
That is great. The guru says a question to his question. He that's a question to his question, because that's what the Irish go, or people go to the Irish. You answer a question with a question, and they go, "We do, eh?" So that's what my series is all about: inventing new questions, new metaphors. And it really resonated with me, Frederick, because I at one point recalled, guy goes to his guru and he says, "What's the best question I can ask you?" And he goes, "The one you just asked me." Well, it's truly been enlightening and fun, and I can't wait for part 2 and part 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, because we never got to the origins of dough, the stuff I buy beer with, which is a part of Susie and I's mantra. Some wise words that the Frederick Guru taught us many years ago that we love to sing and repeat all the time. But again, I have to tell you how much I thank you for one of my favorite jokes that I repeat constantly is, "What's the difference between a hobo and a bum?" A bum says, "You got a spare cigarette?" A hobo says, "Smoking alone?" Have you ever written down or documented all your great wise little quips like that? What do you call those?
I, you know, once you start, for me, once I started a love affair with language, it just became a pattern of once I hear something, I share it.
Yeah.
So if you will literally share whenever you hear something that you like, a little quip or a little joke, then it sticks.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting, uh, it's different for each of us, but it's like, how do you approach your own memory? What is this thing that is memory?
Yeah.
Uh, so here's the weight of it. This came from an English teacher from back in the days when I was an undergraduate student in college the first time. And Mrs. Smith, English teacher at Berea College, she said, she was talking about poetry, but I include storytelling, jokes, songs, and even melodies. But Ms. Smith said, I want you all to remember a few poems, as many as you can. And the reason why is that so when the last delirium comes, you will be muttering something worth listening to.
Yeah. Mutter on, mutter. Well, that's two things. McLuhan described James Joyce's use of puns in Finnegan's Wake like where the hand of man never set foot. He said Joyce used the pun to celebrate the paradoxical exuberance of living through language.
Ah, yeah,
Isn't that beautiful?
it is. It's
Paradox.
also it's
Yeah.
also very notable that the pun in France, right next to England, and Joyce was well aware of this.
Yeah.
The pun was the highest for is the
Yeah.
highest form of humor.
Yes.
And if you read Moliere in
Yes.
in French, you are realizing in short order that he is able to create puns that are not just meant to be read, but are intentionally to be spoken
Yes.
because the cross reference of different sounds, if you look at a few words in French, unless you have them in the context of the sentence, one little tiny expression could mean two or three or four things. And Moliere was very conscious of that. So instead of punning two ways, Moliere never shared a pun unless it was three ways or four or
Yeah.
five.
Yep.
And Joyce is trying to sort of say, you know what? It's the lowest kid on the totem pole of humor in the English language, and I'm gonna pick it up by its bootstraps and give it a new life.
And elevate it. Well put, because it's called sense ratio shifting. When you create spoken word, you're ear oriented. When you create printed word, you're eye oriented. But when you write a book like Finnegan's Wake that has to be read out loud when you're staring at the words, it turns the eye experience into an ear experience,
Yeah.
which is the opposite of Ray Charles, backup singer. She said he turned our ears into our eyes. So it's that sense ratio shifting, that you can shift this, and then you can figure out what reading does to us, which is language about language. You read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people like we do every week, and everybody's studying how everyone else is mispronunciating the words because they all got good educations. So they're like, wait a minute, That's cropsy or corpsey. You know, the word crop and corpse is mushed into one word. Well, people can pronunciate it either way. So who's the, like one guy said, there's a typo in every word in Finnegan's Wake on purpose. Anyways, forever ending. Thank you so much, Frederick. I really appreciate this time. It really rejuvenated me.
Well, Jerry, it's really lovely to see you, and I want you to remember to give my best regards to Susie.
I will, and my best regards to your whole family. And I will send you some dates, and let's schedule part 2 because this has been truly exciting and enlightening. Thank you so much, Frederick.
You're welcome, brother. All right. I'll say good night.
Bye. Love you.